Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. We're going to start with two Chicago institutions tonight. The first is the Chicago Defender, the African American newspaper that will cease print publication after 114 years. It will only be online. According to Smithsonian Magazine, for nearly 115 years, the Chicago Defender has been a vital news source for African Americans in Chicago and beyond. At a time when black voices were largely excluded from mainstream media platforms, the Defender covered both major events, the 1919 Chicago race riot, the murder of Emmett Till, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., and the details of black community life, births, deaths, weddings, graduations, you name it. It was at everybody's house, Glen Regis, a former Defender editor, tells Monica Davey and John Elgin of the New York Times. It was at the barbers. It was everywhere, South Side or West Side. There was a joke that if someone said something had happened and someone else said it hadn't, you knew it didn't happen if it wasn't in the Defender. This week, however, marks the end of an era. On Wednesday, the Defender will release its last print issue, shifting its focus exclusively to digital content. At its peak in the late 1920s, the newspaper boasted a circulation of 250,000, but that number had dwindled to 16,000 in recent years. The Defender's website, on the other hand, reaches 475,000 unique visitors each month. I think it's the right decision, said Hiram Jackson, CEO of Defender parent company Real Times Media. The publication was founded on May 5, 1905 by Robert S. Abbott, who initially ran the operation from the kitchen of his landlord's Chicago apartment. In its early days, the Defender consisted of 4-page, 6-column handbills filled with local news tidbits and clippings from other papers. 5 years later, Abbott hired a full-time reporter and started to expand the Defender's focus to issues of national importance, and in turn the paper began to attract a national audience. Borrowing the splashy approach deployed by publishers like Pulitzer and Hearst, Abbott sought to call attention to the racial injustices that permeated America during the Jim Crow era. According to PBS, the Defender was rife with sensational headlines, red ink, and graphic images, but it took an unequivocal stance against gravely serious subjects like white oppression, segregation, lynchings, and other crimes perpetrated against African Americans. To distribute the paper beyond the Mason-Dixon line, Abbott partnered with black railway porters. Despite the Ku Klux Klan's attempts to confiscate its pages, the Defender spread throughout the South. By the start of World War I, 2/3 of the paper's readers were located outside Chicago. The Defender is considered to be a major driver of the Great Migration, which saw more than 6 million African Americans move from the South to the North, Midwest, and West between 1916 and 1970. It actively worked to encourage African Americans in the South to leave the region. The Defender spoke of the hazards of remaining in the overtly segregated South and lauded life in the North. Job listings and train schedules were posted to facilitate the relocation, PBS explains. The Defender also used editorials, cartoons, and articles with blazing headlines to attract attention to the movement, and even went so far as to declare May 15, 1917, the date of the Great Northern Drive. Over the years, the Defender campaigned for anti-lynching legislation, called for the integration of sports teams, and argued against the segregation of the armed forces. The publication attracted such illustrious contributors as Langston Hughes and Gwendolyn Brooks. By 1956, it had transitioned from a weekly distribution schedule to a daily one. More recently, however, the Defender has been struggling through the same challenges that have afflicted most other newspapers in the country, namely declines in print advertising and a growing number of readers who prefer to get their news online. In 2008, the paper switched back to a weekly circulation, and now it is starting a new chapter, one that will be centered around the demands of the digital era. It's an economic decision, Jackson said, but it's more an effort to make sure that the Defender has another 100 years. The article doesn't mention that the Defender was also the promoter of Chicago's famous Bud Billiken Parade. We're going to move on now to Gene Pingatore, who died recently at the age of 82. He was Illinois' most successful high school basketball coach and was featured in the movie Hoop Dreams. He gained more than 1,000 victories and 2 state championships at St. Joseph's High in Westchester. Ironically, he didn't win a championship with his greatest player, Isaiah Thomas, who once told me that that was his greatest regret in his basketball career. Here's local Chicago news on Gene Pingatore right before he gained his 1,000th victory.
Gene Pingatore is the undisputed dean of boys high school basketball in Illinois. He's had a record-setting run at St. Joe's over 5 decades, made famous by coaching a Hall of Famer like Isaiah Thomas, and a certain movie that you may have heard of. As Megan Maliki reports, Ping's hoop dreams are far from over.
I'm a screamer and a yeller, but I care about the kids.
They broke the mold with Gene Pingatore. In his 48th season at St. Joseph, he still has the same passion for coaching as he did in his first year.
I think I have it. But, physically, I'm not, I still pace the sidelines. Yeah. I used to kick more things, and I'm calmer that way.
I would think if you didn't have the passion, you wouldn't be doing it.
I wouldn't do it. No, I'm going to keep doing it. As long as I'm effective.
All right, 3 lines. Make sure you hold it.
Gene just turned 80 years young, but his coaching style is old school.
When I tell my jokes today, they don't understand what I'm talking about. I'm not on Facebook. I'm not on social media.
He's just teaching us about life. Like, it's not just about basketball. It's the stuff that he tells us outside of basketball, like shaving during school. It's a lot of stuff that he teaches us. It helps me.
He tells you what?
To shave.
Yeah.
And if we don't shave, we got to run stairs and this and that. He's always telling us how we need to respect the game and we need to respect each other.
Gene's had roughly 400 students go on to play in college, 70 to 80 in Division I. What makes him happy is seeing former players like Kurt and Bears wideout Cam Meredith stop by to see him.
That's really important to me, When kids leave and they come back, maybe we did something right.
Some might wonder what's still left for Gene to accomplish. Well, he's just 10 wins away from a major milestone, 1,000 career victories. But that's not why.
You can't be in it for the wins. We're teachers. My classroom is the gym. The success of the kids after they leave us is what it's all about.
If you've seen the movie Hoop Dreams, the portrayal of him in the movie was not always flattering, and that was somewhat controversial. He initially didn't like it, but he got used to it later on. We're going to move on now to our feature, Rip Torn, one of my favorite actors who died recently at the age of 88. Here's Canadian television on the death of Rip Torn.
You're late. Sit down.
Rip Torn, an Emmy Award-winning actor whose career spanned 7 decades and countless characters, including Zed in Men in Black, has died at the age of 88. Torn's signature crooked grin, gruff voice, and a certain devilish glint in his eyes made him particularly well-suited to play bad boys and unpredictable characters.
If you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball. What?
Torn got his start in Hollywood in the 60s and blamed a lag in his career during the 70s and 80s on his political views, including criticism of the Vietnam War. But with the 90s came a late career resurgence, with roles in The Larry Sanders Show, which earned him an Emmy Award, and in Dodgeball and 30 Rock.
Jack, you old dog, how are ya?
That role earned him another Emmy nomination in 2008. His former 30 Rock co-star Alec Baldwin paid tribute to Torn on Twitter, writing, quote, "He was a deeply committed, phenomenal actor. See you down the road, Rip, you wonderful madman." Torn was known to have a tempestuous nature that sometimes cost him roles or caused him trouble on set and in his private life. There were also a few headline-making alcohol-related incidents, including an arrest in 2010 after the actor broke into a closed bank that he had mistaken for his home. After a long career with nearly 200 credits to his name, the amount of other actors whose lives Torn touched are many, and many of them are remembering him on social media. Vincent D'Onofrio tweeted, "Our younger generation of actors may not know of Rip, but they should. Rip was as unique an actor as anyone could ever hope to be."
Well, a young announcer got a couple of things right, but she got a couple of things wrong. Rip Torn was an established actor way before the 60s. He was in the Actors Studio Theater in the 50s. In fact, that's where he met his second wife, Geraldine Page, and he also helped his cousin, Sissy Spacek, become a great actress through the Actors Studio. Did a great turn on Alfred Hitchcock in 1956, but he was a real badass. Dennis Hopper once pulled a knife on him, and that cost him a role in Easy Rider that Jack Nicholson took, but he won a $500,000 lawsuit when Dennis Hopper claimed on television that Rip Torn pulled a knife on him. His greatest role was as Artie in The Larry Sanders Show, and every once in a while he'd do something like talk about Marilyn Monroe, and you weren't sure whether he was talking fictionally or in truth because he did know her. Here are some of his greatest moments as Artie, and then Gary Shandling talking about hiring him for the role.
Look at this one. Kingsley proved himself completely maladroit in the host's chair. Adroit means able. Mal means bad or not. Put them together, maladroit, not able. Capiche?
45 minutes to find a guest host. Great. Do I call the list of regulars?
Call in this order. Jerry Seinfeld, Richard Lewis, Bob Saget, John Ritter, Howie Mandel, Louis Anderson.
Howie Mandel.
You're right. Flop Howie and Louis. Bump Saget from third to fourth. And make sure that Seinfeld knows that he's our first choice. When he says no, make sure that Richard Lewis thinks that he's our first choice, and so on down the list.
Oh, your mind amazes me.
I'm just now comfortable with it myself. Okay, Phil?
Are you going to air tonight's show?
No, we'll put on the best of Larry. But I'll always have a copy of tonight's show close by. Just keep that in mind next time you want to throw your weight around. You may go. Don't let the doorknob hit you in the ass.
Concern yourself with the Wait Here issue. Suzanne Summers tomorrow. Do you want her to bring the Thigh Master?
You know, Lori Loughlin took my money.
Oh, come on.
No, I'm telling you. When I went for the cheese.
When you went for the cheese, that's what you're calling it now?
No, she was at my house, right? And she was playing with my wallet.
Yeah, I'll bet. Listen, you got to be very careful when you accuse a friend of stealing money, because many years ago I was in New York with Lenny Bruce, and he accused me of taking $50 from him, and it turned very ugly, and I popped him.
You know, you've told me this story before, and you took the money.
That may be.
Hey, Artie,
Yeah.
do you ever notice that we get caught up in a certain kind of thought process?
Thought process?
Yeah, thought process.
What thought process?
Like the thought process we're involved in right now. I think we should try and catch it, put a stop to it.
Fine, and stop it we shall do.
Good. You know, I think Rip Torn was always a gigantically respected actor. He wouldn't read. His agent came in with him, and he wouldn't read for the part, which I respected. So later, when I still was undecided if it would work with Rip, because you just don't know. I asked him to come in by himself. I called him up, and I said, would you come in and talk to me? And he did. And he sat in my office just with me. And I said, would you just read this with me so we can get a feel if it just feels right? But if you don't want to, I respect that. And he said, I don't want to. I said, I respect that. And I started to put the script away, and he went, give it to me. And I honestly don't remember a more electric moment. And I was the only guy who saw it. I was there in the room, and the man stands up, and he's electric. And he's Artie. I had to go to HBO and say, I know, I saw him do it. He has his demons, Rip does, and you have to work through them, but you get something really deeply genuine. It's so alive, gifted, so gifted.
Well, we're going to close tonight with Jim Bouton, who died recently at the age of 80. Jim Bouton was a pitcher for the New York Yankees in the 60s. He was actually a very good pitcher for a little while. He won 20 games in 1963, lost a 1-0 decision to Don Drysdale in the World Series. He was going to be the successor to Whitey Ford. In 1964, he won 18 games and won 2 games in the World Series. The problem was he also led the league in starts, and because he was a fastball pitcher, he essentially blew out his arm, and that was it. The Yankees burned him out in their decline as they did Stottlemyre. He made a brief comeback in 1970 with the Astros as a knuckleball pitcher. That's when I met him. But he's best known for his essential baseball book, Ball 4, written in 1970. A funny, irreverent look at the inside of baseball. The sex, the greenies, the stupid coaches. He tells stories about being on the Yankees and his year with the Seattle Pilots in 1969. Of course, many of his stories are about Mickey Mantle, and some of them are unflattering. When I read the book, I liked the book. I didn't like what he said about Mickey Mantle. Not that some of it wasn't true, but it seemed a little sensationalistic to sell books. And Mickey wouldn't talk to him for a long time. I think later in life, Jim may have realized he was a little unfair to Mickey at times, because Mickey did a lot of nice things for Jim Bouton when he was a rookie. There's a great story in there about Mickey and Phil Linz playing his harmonica on the Yankee bus. There's some good Joe Schultz material. He was the manager of the Seattle Pilots. And there's a lot of interesting stuff about the labor issues in baseball at the time, and a lot of interesting stuff about Marvin Miller, whose podcast we've done. Essential reading for baseball aficionados. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. Jim Bouton's nickname was the Bulldog. He was given that name by sports writer Maury Allen for the way he attacked hitters with that vicious fastball early in his career, with his hat always flying off on the mound. So as a final tribute to Jim Bouton, we're going to play Hey Bulldog by the Beatles. We usually don't get Beatles stuff through here. It's probably going to get knocked off, but it's worth a try.
Hey, Bulldog.